George Russell scored his maiden Grand Prix victory with a commanding drive in Sao Paulo, leading home a Mercedes 1-2. Coming up on the Grand Prix-Cap today, George Russell banishes Sakir 2020 memories with his maiden win. Max Verstappen is a brilliant driver, but he has a lot to learn about being champion. K-Mag and Haas deliver the feel-good moment F1 needed. And I rate the drivers and the race. So it's mics on and away we go! Well, welcome back everybody. That was definitely more like the Formula One we all know and love, wasn't it? We had surprises, we had some changeable weather, we had great racing, we had a little bit of controversy. It was just Interlagos. It was awesome, wasn't it? Just such a good weekend. And I think F1 needed it. I think we all needed it as well. Just that little sort of refresher, the reminder of why we really do love this sport. And obviously it's not to discredit Red Bull at all, because they've done a fantastic job this season. They've built the best car and the best driver has gone and delivered. But it can become a bit monotonous when they're constantly at the front. And we've seen it before in history. And then those shock results, you think back to 2020 where we had Pierre Gasly win in Monza and Sergio Perez score his first victory at Sakir. Those moments become all the more special because they're just so rare. And this weekend, we got two of them. We got Kevin Magnussen on pole on Friday for Haas, which was just incredible. And we got George Russell's maiden he got his first win with the sprint, and he got his maiden Grand Prix victory yesterday in the Grand Prix at Sao Paulo. So I'm going to start with Kevin Magnussen and Haas delivering the feel-good moment F1 needed. It was just such a beautiful moment, because very rarely do you get to see the drivers share a moment with their mechanics. And just the way it all panned out, it was fabulous to see Kevin celebrating with his team immediately on the moment that they all realised that they had secured pole position. And they played it beautifully. They got him to the front of the queue, they knew the rain was coming, and they took full advantage of their position within the pit lane to get themselves what they were hoping just for a really good starting position, maybe in the top 5. I think pole was beyond their wildest dreams, and yet that's what became reality. And to see the smiles and the cheers and the sheer unadulterated joy in the Haas garage was just fantastic. And bear in mind, this is a team that could have gone out of business about 18 months ago. It was really struggling for money in terms of, sponsors, and they had the whole rich energy thing. Then Nikita Mazepin and the Russian invasion, they had to get rid of him. And back comes Kevin Magnussen, who, it looked like his Formula One career was done and dusted. But he comes back, delivers a P5 in the first round of the season, and now he delivers a pole position. Just brilliant, absolutely superb. And it put the spotlight on them for a minute, and it just made us realise that, this is the F1 we want to see. We want to see drivers who are absolutely capable, given a chance in competitive machinery. We just want that unpredictability, that excitement, that shock of something new, something exciting. It was just absolutely magical, and I'm so happy for Magnussen, so happy for the Haas team, because you have to remember that the mechanics, they're not global superstars like the Formula One drivers and some of the team principals. They're everyday people like you and me. So when times are tough for the team, times are really tough for them. And a real moment for them of joy and of happiness. And they deserve it, because they've kept going, they've worked hard, and that's their moment. And no one can ever take that away from them. So let's move on to the other big story of the weekend, which is George Russell scoring his first 2 wins in Formula One. Of course, he won the sprint. Brilliant drive in the sprint. He had to battle with Max Verstappen to take the lead. But one thing was clear, was he's not going to be intimidated by anybody. He's good in wheel-to-wheel battle. He's got the speed. He learns as he goes, so he had to change his line through the centre S and on the run down to turn 4 to really line up the move. And then once in front, he disappeared. He just pulled a gap. Okay, he had the car and the tyres in the sweet spot, but you've actually got to go and make the most of it. It's one thing having the best car and the best tyres at any given moment. You've got to go and deliver, and that's what separates the good from the great, and then the great from the very, very best, because the very best will keep doing that and they will ram it home, whereas the great will be able to do it, but maybe they won't do it all the time. But George showed that he is potentially one of the very best, because not only did he deliver in the sprint, he delivered on race day as well. A good start, managed both safety car restarts. It was a commanding drive. At no point did he look under pressure. And that's because he did the job that he needed to do out front. And look, don't get me wrong, a lot of these drivers, if you put them out front, they're so used to it because of what they did in their junior careers, they'll just run off and hide. It's when you start putting them in those 50-50 competitive situations in battle that things can sometimes come awry. But for George, he ran his race to perfection, absolutely to perfection. He kept his nerve when Lewis Hamilton was chasing him in the closing stages, because he could have got excited or a bit flustered and made an error, snatched a break at the restart, knowing that he had to keep Lewis behind. But he drove beautifully, and there was no air of panic on the radio. It was just a great drive. It was the drive of someone who had won several races before, and yet this was his first Grand Prix win. And you saw the emotion come out afterwards. There was tears. You don't know how you're going to react in that moment. And that's a whole lifetime's worth of work. And it culminates in this moment. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, really, for George, in what he hopes is a career filled with more victories and possible world championships. And talking of world championships, he's absolutely now a world champion in the making. If you think back, Lewis Hamilton drove to his first victory in a wild race in Canada. Sebastian Vettel had to navigate a really wet race in Monza. Verstappen had to navigate a tyre preservation race in Spain, holding off Kimi Raikkonen. These drivers who have had to take their first wins and then gone on to become world champion, their first wins haven't been handed to them necessarily. They've had to still go and do the job. And they've shown that they are world champion material by going on and completing that job in some style. So for George, this was a real moment of reckoning for him. Had Lewis got past, there would have been questions about his mentality. Can he keep it together? Is he a choker? But there's none of that. He kept his nerve and he delivered. Absolutely superb. This was a race full of incident, but one incident I'm going to focus on now before I mention the others as I go through the driver ratings is what happened with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez on the run up to the line in the closing meters. So obviously Max was told to give the position back to Checo for Checo's fight with Charles Leclerc over second in the World Championship. Of course, Verstappen has nothing left to gain this season. There's one more race victory that he can collect next week in Abu Dhabi. And he'd had quite a race up to this point, but he refused to hand back the position to Checo, much to the dismay of probably the team, definitely to Checo, and the disgust of many fans around the world. And then his interview afterwards really painted a bad picture for Max. And I think Chainbear summed it up really well. He's incredibly talented, but tough to like. And he probably doesn't care whether he's liked by the fans. But as the legendary football manager Brian Clough used to say, everybody likes to be liked. And obviously it's nice to be liked, isn't it? You have friends and you value their opinion and their feelings about you. If you just go through life not caring about anybody, you probably just turn into Lord Voldemort. But, I'm not suggesting for a fact, I'm not suggesting for a moment that Max Verstappen's about to become the darkest dark wizard of all time. And you have to think, does Max really call the shots now at Red Bull? It really does look like it. And I think Verstappen has thoroughly disrespected his team and his teammate in this, because you really need to have that wider perspective, even when you're in the car, that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people, like I mentioned with Haas, who are just everyday people coming into work, doing the best job they can. They're incredibly skilled people in what they do, and they have to work under a huge amount of pressure, and they have to deliver really high performance to make these Formula One teams function and deliver quality racing cars. And then to go and disrespect the team and his teammate the way he did, and almost refused to apologise. It's shades of Sebastian Vettel from 2013, where it got to a point between him and Mark Webber where there was enough animosity for them to start almost making their own rules of engagement. And the disappointing thing is that Verstappen now is a world champion, and of course the 2021 season will always have its question marks about his race conduct, but this season he's been near flawless. There's been no collisions. He's raced beautifully against others when needed to, and he did need to in the early stages of the season. But he's just soured the taste. Everyone will look back and go, he refused to give up a 6th place. It wasn't like he was being asked to give up a victory or a podium. It was 6th place. And to a guy like Verstappen, what is 6th place when you've won the World Championship already? It doesn't matter. Do the right thing. I think Max has got a lot to learn about embodying the name of champion. You can be champion on paper and by fact, but there is a certain grace to how you carry yourself and how you conduct yourself in the wider view. And that is something that's really important in this modern era of social media, and everything is broadcast really quickly. If you think back to how Ayrton Senna conducted himself, he'd made some really questionable decisions. Japan 1990 being probably top of the list. But then there was that other flip side to him where he was incredibly spiritual and gave back to Brazil. I'm not suggesting for a moment that Verstappen needs to go and do a load of charity work, but you get the image I'm painting. There was these two sides to Senna. We don't know a huge amount of Max's personal life, but the on-track persona that we see can sometimes be a little bit spiky. And if that's the view that he gives out to people, then that's how people will start to view him. And he shouldn't be doing that, because that's probably not a true reflection of himself. It's him as a competitor, and that's absolutely fine. All these drivers are competitive animals. We saw how Esteban Ocon responded to a request from the team to not fight Fernando Alonso. He just needs to just widen his perspective a little bit and realise that you don't need to hold a grudge for something that happened months and months ago when the end goal has already been achieved. All right, driver ratings time. So I'm going to just change the format a little bit because I've just spoken about Max Verstappen, so I won't start with him, otherwise you'd be oversaturated with me talking about Max for far too long. So I'm actually going to start with Mercedes, and then I'll flip back. We'll work in reverse order of the top 3 teams. So we'll go Mercedes, Ferrari, then Red Bull, so you have a bit of a break. So we'll start with the race winner, George Russell, who started on Grand Prix pole position but didn't actually take pole position. This is the weird thing about the sprint. With the sprint setting the grid for the race, the pole sitter doesn't always necessarily start on pole for the Grand Prix, but it goes down in the record books. Silly, really silly. So George Russell started from first on the grid, and he won the race. He drove beautifully, as I've already spoken about. Absolutely superb drive. World champion in the making. Rating of 5 for George Russell. Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, started second, finished second, but he had some adventures, not least the collision with Max Verstappen. And I'll talk about that now then. I think the 5-second time penalty was fair because they went side by side into turn 1. Verstappen did get his nose ahead, but obviously Lewis on the inside line is naturally going to get to the next corner a little bit earlier. Verstappen still alongside, but it's always a disappearing wedge. Lewis drove a line that told Max, there's no way through here, you need to back out and try again later, son. Verstappen even admitted to this. He said he had no intention of backing out, even though Lewis left him no space, which is just a ridiculous thing to say. It does make you wonder, did he do it on purpose? Did he do it out of spite? Did he, or was it just a momentary lapse of judgment? But we've seen how Max goes racing, and this is just a further addition to a pattern that emerged some time ago. If you think back to 2018, Verstappen lost a win in Brazil because Esteban Ocon pulled pretty much exactly the same move when trying to unlap himself, and he picked up a time penalty on that occasion. So I think Verstappen can have no complaints about it, and the rules are vague and clunky. But I think, if you look from the off-board shot as they are from behind at turn 1, you can see that Lewis is taking the racing line. He's going to get to the corner first. Max should probably back out and line it up for turn 4. You also have to remember the situation they're in. Lewis can't afford, neither of them can really afford to slow up too much because you've got an angry pack of cars behind them because of a safety car restart. You've got to think about these, and this feeds into Verstappen thinking about the broader context of things sometimes. Maybe Max just, when he's fighting Lewis, he's so hell-bent on beating him, it just brings the blinkers in far too much, and we get these incidents. But still, Lewis recovered. His pace was really good. He survived with some damage, but minimal. Didn't harm his pace too much. Did get himself back up to second. Couldn't or didn't challenge. Here's a question for you. Did Lewis really go for it in the closing laps? Or did he keep himself just out of range of DRS so he didn't challenge George too much, but he was just enough in the way to slow anyone else down who was coming to take George's come to challenge George for the first victory of his career? Let me know in the comments whether you think Lewis almost deliberately protected George's victory. So Lewis's race rating from me is a 4 because he could definitely have left a little bit more space for Max at turn 2, but he wasn't required to because he was on the racing line as far as I'm concerned. So, I still think a 4 is fair. Let's move to Ferrari, and we'll go to the man who finished in 3rd place, which was Carlos Sainz. He actually finished 2nd in the sprint, drove really nicely in the sprint, and drove really well again on Grand Prix Sunday, starting from 7th, finished the race 3rd. 3.5 for Carlos, really, really good performance. The strategy he was on was bonkers because of a tear-off in the rear brake duct. So, yeah, he made the most of a slightly awkward situation for Ferrari. But it wasn't as awkward as what Charles Leclerc was giving them. The Monegasque started 5th, got taken out into the barrier by Lando Norris, survived that, and then recovered to finish 4th. He did ask to be let through for those extra points, and I can see his point, but Ferrari held firm because you can't really ask Carlos to drop a podium. If they were 4th and 5th, then yeah, you can definitely argue that Charles was in the right there, but still, decent points. He's level on points with Perez now. It's all to play for in the final race of the season for that 2nd place in the championship. I'm going to rate Charles' performance as a 3. Sergio Perez also gets a 3. He started 4th. He did finish 7th, but that late safety car absolutely stuffed him. On the wrong tyres, he just had no pace. I don't know why they didn't put him on softs for the last stint. He went soft, medium, I believe. So, it was slightly odd from Red Bull, but did the best he could. He defended as hard as possible. He didn't make it dangerous for anybody, even though he was much slower at points, and then very hard done by on the line because Max didn't give the place back when Sergio had been told that that's what would happen. So, he was rightly, I think, a bit miffed. And we'll talk Max Verstappen now. He started 3rd, made a decent start. He was challenging. Obviously, the collision with Lewis, and he ended up finishing 6th, but his recovery drive was excellent. He drove fantastically. He made the overtakes. He recovered well. But I can only rate him as a 1 because the lack of sportsmanship and awareness and the disrespect to his teammate and his team, I think, just overshadowed his whole race. If he'd just recovered to 6th or 7th, with the damaged car, fine, well done. But the disrespect he's shown, I'm rating him as a 1. There's no place for that in sport. These are selfish animals, but you still need to recognise that there's a group of people around you that provide you this opportunity and give you this platform to go and be the wonderful success that you are. Sad. Really sad, really. Let's move to Alpine, where they had a much better Sunday than Saturday. Their drivers started 17th and 18th because they'd been playing dodgems on Saturday, and they recovered to 8th and 5th. So Esteban Ocon finished 8th. I'm going to rate him as a 3. Fernando Alonso, fabulous race. Brilliant drive. I didn't like his comments really after the sprint, although you can kind of understand that that's heat of the moment stuff. Just keep that behind closed doors, Fernando. There's no need for it, to be honest. I'm going to rate him as a 4. Excellent drive. And it was really handy points because McLaren had a double failure to finish. And it looks like they're going to be confirmed as 5th in the championship in the Constructors. Lando started 6th. Not well all weekend, but drove excellently, all things considered. I'm going to rate him as a 2.5. He's driving pretty well up to that point. Daniel Ricciardo started 11th after finishing the sprint in that position, but kind of nudged Kevin Magnussen, which wasn't a huge error. It was just one of those, everyone's going into a slow corner and you can just bump into somebody by mistake. It's just one of those things. But Magnussen swung round and Daniel tried to take avoiding action. They met in the middle. It was really unfortunate for both of them. Ricciardo's fault, yes, absolutely. But just very, very unfortunate for Ricciardo and for Magnussen. So I'm going to give Daniel a slightly harsh 1.5. Valtteri Bottas back in the points, second race in a row. He started 14th, finished 9th, a 2.5 for the Porridge Man. Zhou Guanyu 13th to 12th, a 2 for him. Sebastian Vettel did go backwards from 9th to 11th, but he drove really well. Made some really nice overtakes, running in the top 5 at one point. 2.5 for him. Lance Stroll, questionable defence at best on Saturday. Recovered from 16th to 10th, although Sebastian felt they could have allowed him through for that 10th place, considering he's been nice lately. And yeah, he's done a really good job recently. But when Stroll's dad is the boss, I don't think they're going to be asking him to move over to hand over a point. So 2.5 for both Aston Martin drivers. Kevin Magnussen, the pole winner. He started the race 8th, but no one will care because he took pole position. He didn't finish the race. No one will care. He took pole position on Friday in the Haas. A rating of 4. I mean, if he'd finished the race, I'd have given him a 5, but he didn't finish the race, sadly. So just going to give the 4, which is still an excellent rating, to be fair. His teammate Mick Schumacher did okay. The race day wasn't quite as good as the sprint, where he came from 20th to 12th, made an excellent fist of things in the sprint. Kind of where the Haas should have been, though, is where he finished. So a 3 for Mick. Pierre Gasly started the race 10th, fell to 14th. Not quite sure how he got there, because at one point he was racing Sebastian Vettel and Lando Norris in the top 10. Guessing the safety car timing probably wasn't very good for him. A 2 for Pierre, a 2 for Yuki Tsunoda, who, bizarrely, I can't believe we're having to go through this again. He didn't unlap himself. He's not sure. He said he was bullied by the FIA, which is a strong word. But I don't know why he wasn't allowed to unlap himself. It's almost like they forgot he was there. When they said lapped cars can overtake, it was 23 and 6. But Tsunoda was ahead of Latifi and a lap down and wasn't allowed to overtake. So I need to have a look at some articles and find out what was going on. But really, really bizarre. Real aberration on race control's part to allow that to happen. And he kind of got in the way. It's like on F1 Manager, where, because they don't do the safety car, the unlapping behind the safety car, if you're a lap down when the safety car comes out on the game, you just end up a lap behind everybody, which is incredibly frustrating and your race is ruined. So, yeah, feel for Yuki there. Feel for Yuki. He wasn't having a great race, to be honest, but he didn't need that. That was a bit unfair. So a 2 for him. And 2s all round at Williams. They didn't really show up this weekend. You'd have thought maybe they'd have been able to show on the straights with their really slippery philosophy, but they ended up 15th and 16th, so it wasn't a particularly good weekend for Williams. So let's now go to the race rating. I'm going to give it a 9 because I'm factoring in the whole weekend, the qualifying session, the sprint and the Grand Prix. We had loads of overtaking. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We had a couple of collisions, so Verstappen and Hamilton. We had Norris and Leclerc, which I know I didn't touch on earlier. Lando's fault, because he got on the curb and lost control of the car. But Charles was very lucky to get away from that, and then he produced a super recovery drive. Really, really excellent race for me. And like I said at the start, it's just what F1's all about. This is more like it. This is the Formula One we tune in to see. So as always, I asked my friends at the Grid Talk podcast and Everything F1's Tom Downey and Hit the Apex's Jawad Yacoub gave the race 7 out of 10. Monkey Seat Podcast's Carl King and Grid Talk host Owen Medford gave the race an 8. And fellow Grid Talk host Ruby Price gave the race an 8, bordering on a 9. So of course, let me know in the comments what you thought of the race. Leave a rating in the comments below. So the checkered flag is now waving on another show. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope you enjoyed the Brazilian Grand Prix. Sao Paulo Grand Prix. We mustn't call it the Brazilian Grand Prix, even though everybody does. So, yeah, Brazilian Grand Prix. You can find more of my work at f1chronicle.com and insidef2.com. We've got the final F2 round of the season as well coming in Abu Dhabi, so I'll be putting in some articles with them. So you can find more on this channel too, like short videos reacting to breaking news, general opinion, F1 Manager clips. I do F1 Manager streams, so I'm streaming with Alpine when I get time and also when the internet here decides to behave itself, because I tried to stream last weekend and it didn't have it. So we'll try again at some point soon. If you like what I do, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, wherever you want. And if I rock the mic, give a like. Thank you very much if you do. And if you like the show enough, subscribe too. We are at 138 subscribers now, which is fantastic. So thank you so much to everyone for the support. I'll be back next week for the final Grand Prix-Cap of the season, but that won't be the final show of the season. I'll try and do some stuff in the off-season, such as little podcasts here and there, and of course streams with Alpine. And until then, enjoy the racing. I'll see you when the 5 red lights go out.